Thank you for coming. Just so you know where you are, this is the Flinders Zero Carbon Community Electric Vehicle Forum. If that's not where you expect to be, just sit quietly for an hour and a half and then quietly leave. How embarrassing. I'd like to start by acknowledging we're on the land of the Bunurong people and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. I'd also like to say a little bit about you. It was kind of you when you registered for this that you told us where you came from. And interesting that about a quarter of the people here are from Flinders, but about a third from elsewhere on the Mornington Peninsula. And I think 10% of people have holiday houses here, and then there's a scattering of people from far afield, somewhere beyond the peninsula. So welcome to all of you. I hope if you've driven a long way, you get to enjoy the beaches or the coffee shops that we have. The last event like this we had was in the middle of last year. It was an event about the dangers of gas in your home and about electrifying your home to save energy. And the committee organised that, and the committee of the Flinders Zero Carbon Community, I will say FZCC for now, it's a committee of about 10 people, and another from here, which you might like to look around and see them. They'll wave and wear a white t-shirt, because we're a bit of a faceless group, and if you want to have chats or you have questions, then please grab one of these white t-shirt people and ask about what we're doing. Since that forum last year, we've excitingly had a battery installed here. And that was about 2 years of work. That was a big achievement. It's the first non-power company, what's the phrase? First battery generally owned by a local community in Australia. It was funded by the federal government. So that's sitting out there cooking away. Since then, we've been busy trying to encourage people to do more for the environment, which generally means getting solar in your house, getting rid of gas in your house, getting more electrification in what's going on in your home. So today is, I should just mention a couple of other things. One of them is, if you want a toilet, they're through the door back there and around behind. And please turn your mobile phones off. So my name is Jon Pearce. I'm one of the co-chairs of the FZCC. The other one being Ralph Kenyon, who is up the back there, I think. The aim of having electric vehicle forums is this one way we can reduce our carbon footprint. And in Flinders, we actually have about twice as many electric vehicles per capita than the rest of the country. So we're doing fairly well. And last year we had, I think, about 12% of all registered cars in Flinders were electric vehicles, which also is well beyond the national number. But they're not things that everybody can afford. And they're getting a lot cheaper now. And I hope that by the time you listen to our speakers, two of them, you'll realise that they're really a good deal. And they're something that you should aspire to. So to see how well we do, I'm going to ask you two questions. One, I'd like to know, please, could you raise your hand if you already have an electric vehicle? And people will quickly count to about 15, I think. And how many are thinking of buying one in the next year? Well, it's about another 15, I guess. So I'll ask you at the end whether anybody has changed their mind, positively, negatively, and to see whether we'd be effective. We have two speakers today, and to introduce the speakers, one of our committee members, Bello, is going to do the job. Caitlin is the newest member on our committee. She's a recent graduate from Flinders, working in local government. And it's interesting, she came to us because she was passionate about the environment, and she looked around to see who are the people really doing something in this area on the peninsula, and she found us, and she got right to the top straight away. Well done, Caitlin. And Caitlin has been doing, well, she does a lot of variety of things on our committee, but in particular, social media things. So if you've been seeing Facebook or Instagram posts, they're most likely put up by Kate. So Kate is going to introduce 2 speakers, and then after that we're going to have after that we're going to have a forum where you can there we go, turn it on. We're going to have a question and answer type forum, so you can ask questions of people, in particular Bryce and Richard, who are the 2 speakers. They'll ask you questions, and 2 other secret people we have embedded in the audience will come sit up here so you can get all your questions answered. Caitlin, over to you, please.
Alright, thank you for that. I'm sorry if it's a bit hard to see me. I didn't realize how tall this podium was going to be. But last time we had an EV forum, Bryce unfortunately had COVID and had to present through Zoom, so it's lovely to have you here in real life this time. And for an introduction to Bryce, since 2008 he has been working in, writing about and presenting on the EV sector. You may have even read some of his work in The Driven, Renew magazine, or on the Australian Electric Vehicle Association national website, where he wrote the EV car model fact sheets, and you can even find them down here there. Bryce has also been influential in writing the EV transition support consultancy, EV Choice, in which he's been involved in developing EV transition plans and charging installation designs for council, designing an accredited course for electricians to understand EV charger installation, and most recently been a part of a Standards Australia committee, developing standards for the EV charging. Safe to say, he knows a thing or 2 about electric vehicles, so please give it up for Bryce.
Thank you, Kate. Good to have you there. So it seems to be outstanding unelected. I'm usually sort of in front. Yes, thank you for the introduction, and I'm going to say something if you're interested in EVs, and hopefully I can answer your questions at the end. It's a big enough group, and we're a little bit tight on time, so please save your questions. So you normally I'd answer things on the way through, but today I think we have the Q&A session at the end, so save them for there, please. That's my topic there. That's what I'm hoping to do. I'm going to basically run through what is an EV, give you a bit of background about the EV transition in general here and overseas. I'm going to start explaining sort of the EV 101 things about how EVs charge, what sort of policy has been happening, what's changing at the moment. And then I'll look at sort of choosing an EV that suits you, so talking about current and coming EVs to Australia, looking for reliable information sources, both about the cars and in general about the impact of EVs on the environment. Also, if you want a copy of these slides, I will email them to you if you email me at that address there. I'll also have this address at the end of the presentation, so if you miss it now, feel free to grab it at the end, rather than trying to take photos. I'd be happy to take photos of them along the way, but it's probably easier if you just get a PDF of the slides. As you can probably guess, I come from a teaching background, so this is a lot of my teaching materials. So I'll talk to you today, it's effective information, so this will be your revision materials for the exam next week. First up, looking at what an EV is, it's basically 4 types. There's your, first up, your plug-in electric vehicles, your PEVs. That's your battery electric vehicle, which has a full battery, and then plug-in hybrids, which have a smaller battery and a petrol motor or a diesel motor to extend the range. And they're now getting up to 70, 80 kilometres just on battery. The regulations recently changed in Europe because at one stage there they were getting down to about 12, 15, 20 kilometres just to meet the requirements. They're very much compliance cars, but they wouldn't want to use it as a plug-in hybrid. They're now getting back to reasonable ranges again now as the regulations changed over there. A hybrid electric vehicle, we're all familiar with the Priuses and Camrys. They were a very early introduction to electric vehicle technology, but in a way they're not electric vehicles because they, as you can see there, they only run on petrol or fossil fuels. So if the fossil fuel runs out, they stop, whereas the fossil fuel runs out on a plug-in hybrid, you can keep going for that, 50, 70, 80 kilometres. And there is the fourth, I call it the zombie, the dead person still walking, the hydrogen car. The reason for that will become clearer as I go on with this talk, but short answer is they take so much energy to create the hydrogen and you can't refuel them pretty much anywhere. We have about 8 refuelling stations in Australia, of which I think only about 4 or 5 are actually publicly available. So I'll be talking primarily about plug-in cars today, and principally about the battery electric vehicle, because for charging a plug-in hybrid, all you really need is a power point. But beyond that, for faster charging and long distance driving, you'll be using the BEV, in which case the charging systems are a different way of thinking, as opposed to refilling a plug-in hybrid or a normal petrol. As I was alluding to earlier, the hybrid vehicle is really only a petrol car in disguise. The fuel savings are about 5 to 20%, depending on how you use it, around town, maybe up to 20%, which is why earlier in the piece, taxi drivers love them, because they're not a lot more expensive than a petrol car, but you can save 20% petrol to start driving, you'd be mad not to buy one. But in the bans that I'll talk about coming up overseas, on the sales of new petrol and diesel passenger and light commercial vehicles, they're included in the ban because they're basically a petrol or a fossil fuel car. As I said earlier, that basically is the zombie. They're disappearing already, and most of the manufacturers have already given up on them. As the battery prices come down, I'll allude to a bit later, the plug-in hybrids niche has sort of got smaller and smaller. They were basically a really good choice. Then batteries were about $1,200 US per kilowatt hour. They're now under $120 per kilowatt hour. They're getting close to $100, and I'll talk more about that. $100 is quite a magic number when it comes to price parity with a petrol car. I'd also like to point out the electric car is not a new phenomenon. That's a 1906 electric car. It's that old, in fact it has a tiller rather than a steering wheel. I'd love to know the history of these photos. There's a whole sequence of them, this lady dressed to the hilt, showing off a really safe new electric car charger with the bare copper bars for the nightstand. They have improved somewhat since then in terms of charging and technologies. I mean, they were around, but the lead-acid battery things was a bit of a limitation on its range, speed, and its longevity. The technology has come a long way since. The transition, by the way, is coming in lots of forms, not just electric cars, which we are going to talk about today. Trucks are coming. There's a Tesla truck, some people may have heard of. There's Scania and Daimler and eCascadia and Fiona, other major brands are actually releasing electric trucks, even here in Australia. Some of them, the new Scania is about 500 kilometre range, so you can do Melbourne to Sydney in one stop effectively, and that would be about the length of time with the new Mega charging system that is mandated for them to stop anyway. So the electric truck will probably beat the hydrogen truck yet again. Machinery is underground things. It's obviously a much safer thing to have no fumes being put out, and there is electric machinery being made these days. The electric bobcat was shown about 18 months, 2 years ago now. Should be available maybe next year, I think they're talking. Tractors, they will be available in Australia starting next year, I believe. And who hasn't tried to be run over by electric Deliveroo or similar? Pretty much almost every second, certainly every delivery bike is electric now, because they're just so much easier for them to get around on. And that, believe it or not, is a Harley-Davidson live wire. So Harley-Davidson do build electric motorcycles. Yes, electric planes even exist. That one over the blue sky is a flight trainer. So if you live near a small airport for flight training happens, a lot quieter. So there'll be a lot more you may would think. And that other one is called the Alice. I believe it's in flight trials at the moment for certification. It's basically an executive jet replacement. 2 pilots and about 7 passengers, I think. Long haul flights and things is another whole topic that I can talk about another day, but that's quite a long talk just on its own. That's coming. Flying cars, that's called the Black Fly, which is sale in America at the moment. It's a vertical takeoff and landing, ultimately designed to be one passenger by the moment pilot, ultimately designed to be autonomous, so it'll land next to you, dial it up on your app, and it'll pick you up and take you or whisk you away at about 100 kilometres an hour, maximum range about 100 k's, and it is actually in existence now, but it doesn't do the autonomous bit yet. That was built, that's a AEV, autonomous electric vehicles, here in Croydon, in Melbourne. They built that, it's overseas on trials at the moment. Ultimately, they will have no steering wheel and pedals. It's on trials elsewhere at the moment overseas. Electric buses are quite a big thing, and they're coming quite soon. There's a number of them running around Melbourne at the moment. Some large Chinese cities are about to change over the entire fleet. One city, Shenzhen, something like that, about 10,000 buses they changed over, and I'll literally the secret, they didn't bring down the Chinese town's grid, and they got much greater savings. Believe it or not, ferries do exist. That one, ferries run almost 90% cost savings, plus no pollution, etc., etc. That does a regular run up into Scandinavia between several sites. And general equipment councils like this stuff, there's ride-on mowers and that sort of thing, will run all day and recharge on a 15 amp power point overnight. Even electric boats, that's a Maserati electric launch that's for sale over in Europe on lakes and things, if you have a very deep pocket. Transitions still happen, and happen quite quickly, as it turns out occasionally. As you can see, around 1900, this pair of photos, first one has one horse's carriage. 13 years later, in this very affluent area of America, you can just see the swish of one horse's tail, and everything else, and a whole lot more of them, is the horse's carriage now. So we have seen these sort of transitions happen before, and it's happening again now. And it happens in all sorts of technologies. We're used to mobile phone, colour TV for the older ones amongst us, air conditioning, all of those things. Basically have a typical uptake curve. Start off with slowly as they're very expensive. Keep whacking that thing. Early adopter price, and then you get people buying the technology as it gets cheaper and better, and then it tapers off the end as it becomes ubiquitous. Does that look familiar? That's the uptake curve in Australia, which is less than the uptake curve in the rest of the world. In Europe, I think it's hit 1 in 4, so almost 25% electric vehicles. Norway, which has that ban coming on this year for the sales of new petrol, passenger and light commercials, has hit 94% sales with plug. I do like this particular slide in my electric cars, as I'll mention later, very, very, very rarely catch fire. Scooters and things do, and you've got to be really wary of these things. So safety of e-bike scooters, buy a known brand and buy from a known supplier here with Australian compliance marks, really important. And always use the charger that came with it. Just because the plug looks like it fits doesn't mean it's the right charger for that battery. Be very careful. And just figure it, as I said there. And yeah, bit of awareness, just charge it somewhere it's not next to the flammable curtains or whatever. And always unplug it when it's finished. If you want to know any more, you can go to the New South Wales County website. As I said, electric cars, not an issue. When it comes to these bikes and things, there'll be a number of fires and a number of people killed around the world due to these things. So anyway, back to EV 101. What is an EVSE, or electric vehicle supply equipment? It's your car charger. It's just a So you'll see basically 3 basic types. There's one that you plug in. One at the top, your left, is what will come with most EVs, will come with one of these, is the plug-in charger. Go to your ordinary power point and charge very slowly. I'll put a table up later about how fast or slow these go. The bottom one there is if you're sort of a Leyland brother and wandering out in the outback and things, that you can plug into anything with a 3-phase 32 amp outback down to an ordinary power point with a few adapters. I carry one of those when I do really long trips, like heading off to Perth or those sort of off the beaten track type trips. For 99% of people you don't need one, but yeah, they're available. They're sort of like a jerry can in the boot. For home charging, these are the 2 main types of charger, a wall, a dedicated charger. The one with the green and white there is called a BYO charger, because you have your own lead and you plug it into a socket. Councils love those because they don't have to maintain the safety of the leads, and you look after your own lead a lot better than people do, like airlines and petrol stations. For home use, I always recommend a tethered lead, that wall box one there, because you just unplug it, wrap around the charger, and off you go. So for home use, tethered chargers are the best, and they can do 32 amps on a single-phase house, or they can even do 32 amp 3-phase if you happen to have a 3-phase house. They can charge your car quite quickly, depending on what sort of charger is built into your car. Those, by the way, employ the charger built into the car. These 2 fellas here bypass the charger, go straight to the battery, and they will do 100 times faster than the home charger. And these are the things you use when you're going to Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, that type of trip. And the modern Hyundai Kona, for instance, they'll do, give you just range of numbers, around 230 kilowatt charging. You can get 80% charge in about 17 minutes. So basically that's about less than the length of a typical morning tea or lunch stop. So they don't really hold you up really heading for a long trip, provided these chargers are available, and they're rolling out, as I'll talk about a bit later. A lot of people say, oh, I won't buy a car yet, or EV yet, because the plugs aren't sorted. They were actually back around 2016 17. That's what we have in Australia. We have a 3-phase system. For your home charging, that one at the top with the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pins, that's your normal socket that you use for home charging. And what 2 big pins below it is for the DC fast charger that I mentioned, those 2 big ones that are on the right. And that is what is standard, and everything, including Tesla's here now. If you bought an older, I was going to buy the Nissan Leaf or a Lexus 300E, they're the last 2 cars with the older DC plug called the Chatamo plug, and they're both on their way out, so they will swap over to the CCS2 very soon. If you buy a Japanese import car or the earlier car pre-2017, they had that combination. So yes, there are some different plugs around, but the first one I mentioned there is what is the standard plug in Australia. In America, they use that. That's the Tesla standard, and that will never come outside of North America because they have a peculiar 2-phase 120, 240 volt system, which we don't have, so we don't need that sort of plug. It would be much slower than the plug that we have standardised on. A lot of people ask me about when can I use my car as my home battery. I used to say for the last 4 or 5 years, 2025, 2025. 2025, please don't ask me 2025. 2025 has arrived, so I can now answer it. There are 3 layers to it. First up, vehicle to load, which has been available for several years now, which is basically plugging an extension lead into the car and running things off it. The early Chatamo plug did have that system from the very beginning, but you had to employ a $10,000 box to convert from DC back to AC. The CCS system learned very quickly about that mistake, and it uses the charger built into the car. So just an adapter often comes with the car itself, just plugs into the port, and you just plug the lead into the back of it, as you can see there. That was running electric kettle that day, if you see that big picture there. That's vehicle to load. That doesn't supply the house unless you run a few extension leads around it. Do not, by the way, under any circumstances, plug that into a generator input. You can either blow up the car or the electronics in the car, or the switchboard, or just not be all that safe if you do it that way. The next layer up is vehicle to home or building, which is where you have a box on the wall, and it connects to a box on the wall, which can then switch the power off from the grid and connect to the car, and that will run your house on the car. And that will be available later this year. There are a number of cars in Australia, unofficially the year they can do it, because they've sold overseas with it, but they haven't yet announced that they will do it. The sellers of the charging wall boxes that will go on the wall and the chargers themselves, well, I've spoken to quite a number of them, they're all saying July to September this year they'll be making formal announcements that you can buy these boxes and install vehicle to home or vehicle to building. The next layer up is like your solar systems putting out to the power grid. There'll be vehicle to grid as well. That's reliant on the supply authorities agreeing the communication standard between the charger, the car and the grid, which probably will be next year. So if you want to make money selling to the grid, maybe wait till next year. There are trials and things of it, so a number of systems that have been trialled, and they're very good at stabilising the grid, but they're not yet available publicly. And that's just basically the information that I spoke about. If you're trying to remember what I said, I put it all in there. Key point of difference between an electric car and what we're used to is we're used to that. We're used to driving within our trip and stopping and refuelling and then moving on. So we either go out of our way or we have to pull off and back on the road, whatever. This is what electric cars do. It has our destination is the recharge. The car sits around 95+% of the time doing nothing whilst you're at work, asleep, shopping, which is roughly the number of time that your car is sitting there doing nothing. Make use of that 95% and let it do its thing while you do yours. And that's what it's about. You pull up to the library, you pull up to shops, you're at home. Most of your charging will happen at home. If you're asleep, it doesn't matter if it takes 1 hour or 10, you're still going to be asleep. And workplace charging, as I'll talk about, is a really good option as well. So the key point is how fast do you need to charge? And that is, well, if you're doing less than 100 kilometres a day, a power point will do. It is important to put in a power point just for charging, so it goes back to the switchboard. But apart from that, that will give you less than 8 hours, and I'll put up a table next to the numbers. And it's about 5 hours near the switchboard, about $500. I am an electrician in part by background, so I can trust me on these numbers roughly. It's often give you a quote, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string, but roughly $500 up to put in a 15 amp power point near your switchboard. And please don't use just a common garden extension leads. That was a BMW i3 some years ago. A mate of mine showed me this after he was charging it overnight. It went a bit warm one night, the next night it basically turned into that. If you are travelling maybe up to 400 kilometres a day, my Kona will do around town 500. It will give me, with a 32 amp single phase house, that will give me a full charge in 9 hours, 0 to 100 by the way, which you never do. Now if I did an absolute 0 and then all the way to 100, it will be 9 hours. Generally speaking, I might recharge it at 20%, talk about 80 or 90. So that's about 6 hours, 5-6 hours. If you're looking at about 1,500 up for the installation of those, including the charger. That's the table I was alluding to. There's a whole article about this, and so if you want the QR code, grab it now or grab it by emailing me for the slides. The portable ones that plug into a PowerPoint, the ones that come with the car, they're those red numbers. It'll give you about 12 kilometres charged an hour. So if you've got 100 Ks, multiplied by 12, it's at 12, 8, 76, about 8 hours. If you're doing, by the way, 15 amp PowerPoint, caravan parks and EVs are a marriage made in heaven. Because you can plug into a 15 amp PowerPoint, you get 24 kilometres charged an hour, 10 hours, that's 240 Ks. If you stop at a caravan park at 5 and leave at 8 or 9 in the morning, that's 15 hours. You can do the maths, you're looking at 300 to 400 Ks recharged over that time. You're doing pretty well. A lot of people were actually expecting a Ford Transit, e-Transit that took up to sale. And it was interesting, a lot of sort of looked like grey nomads to check it out rather than the tradies on it. So I started asking them, and I went, camper van conversion, you can see that sort of measuring up in their heads and getting in and they can stand up in it. And they went, yeah, but we get free fuel all the way around Australia. So I can see that will be quite a thing of people pull it in the floor, stop for a sherry, plug it in, stay there for a few days, recharge for the next part of the trip, free fuel, outside. And your home charges there on single phase, you'll do roughly 50 kilometres charged an hour, that's that 9-hour charge that I've talked about with my Kona. If you happen to have 3-phase charging, most cars on the market now will do 3-phase charging. My Kona doesn't because it's an older model, but the current Kona will. 73 kilometres charged an hour. Some cars will do 22 because the built-in chargers in the car, and they will do nearly 150 kilometres charge. My partner's Renault Zoe, for instance, will do 22 AC. On the other side of the table is your DC chargers, and then you can see some big numbers. So I converted it to how many minutes for 100 Ks. The older chargers were 50 kilowatt, and the older cars are maybe 50 to 70 kilowatt charging. So you might be 20 minutes for 100 Ks, it might be an hour and 20 minutes to get that full charge there. Nowadays, the average car is about 150 kilowatt charging, and the average charger is also about that, looking at 6 minutes for 100 Ks. So 400 Ks, 12, 24, 25 minutes. As I mentioned, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and quite a lot of other cars are over 200 now. Porsches are getting towards 300. Teslas are around 250, 270. If you're getting to that 350 number there, 2.6 minutes for every 100 Ks. You're getting to match the speed of a petrol station. My part of the course that I was involved in writing for electricians to learn about EV charging, the rule of thumb is, and this is what I say when you're assessing what the needs of the customer are, if the customer will be charging more than 4 hours at a time, more than twice a week, maybe go up a layer. So PowerPoint's 6 hours, 3 times a week, maybe go 15 amp instead. If you're doing that for 15 amp, it might be worth looking at the proper home charger. And people also ask me, how far do I get on the car? Range anxiety used to be a big thing. The key point is cars nowadays have quite large batteries and they also recharge fairly quickly. But there were three standards that cars are measured to. And like we've seen with a number of court cases recently with some other petrol cars, the range estimates were so far out that people wanted some money back for being nowhere near their fuel consumption. Same thing can happen here. There are 3 standards. NEDC, which is the old European standard, and still currently in use in Australia, though it's changing. WLTP, which is what is used in Europe now, replaced NEDC, and the US EPA number. The WLTP number is basically I'll throw these up here. NEDC, I like to think it is not even darn close. It's about 30% over. The manufacturers gained the system and managed to keep coming up with numbers. Hence, you'll see plug-in hybrids commonly can quite NEDC numbers. So the BYD Shark, for instance, will have 100 kilometre range. In reality, it's about 70, which is not bad, but it's not 100. WLTP, if you're driving mainly around town to outer suburban, that's a good number. So I will get, for instance, I would never get 557, although my car did actually show me 570 the other day because we're doing a lot of low-speed driving, but I've never seen it there before. But I will get 480 to 500 around town comfortably. And if I'm on a trip to Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, which I have done, 420 kilometres is about right for that. So the US EPA number is middle outer suburban and more highway driving high speed. That's how they came up with their standard. And so whichever number you want, make sure A, if you're checking the range, you're comparing apples with apples, so which standard is in use. And B, if you drive all around town, use the WLTP number. If you're using a lot of highway driving, use the US EPA number. The fact sheets I'll refer you to a bit later will actually list all three numbers where they're available. And there's more detail in a Renew article, edition 155, or at my EV Choice website, I list all the Renew articles if you're not a member. It doesn't even go the distance. Well, that was me on the way to Perth about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, there weren't quite enough chargers, so I ended up the traditional EV owner shop at the Poochera pub. We've always been to Perth, it's sort of an old outback pub, and he used to let people use the three-phase outlet. But it was a fair way away, so you had to sort of plug my portable three-phase charger in. Nowadays, we use PlugShare, and you'll see there that's sort of available all around this sort of area. I just filtered the two types of charger. Green dots are those wall-mounted chargers, 32 amp or three-phase ones, and the orange ones are the DC chargers. Did you see we've got a DC charger somewhere in Flinders. That's the map now for EV chargers around Australia. You can see across the Nullarbor now, there's orange dots which weren't there. There was a big gap from Adelaide to 200 k's west of the border. There were no DC chargers, hence the Poochera pub stop. But nowadays there are chargers going in, and that's in 3 years. It was June 2022 I drove across to Perth. So if you want to, plugshare.com is, that should be www, I missed the W there, is where you go. That's a public site listing of all the chargers that are available in Australia. In fact, the world, if you have to be tracking there. So the future of charging is, well, home charging is where you start. 90-something% of charging, between, they say 70 to 90% of charging is done at home. Then there's workplace charging or shopping centre charging, that type of thing. In France, as you said, all car parks with 90 plus spots must have solar and car charging installed now. You'll have local chargers. These are the DC chargers there for, there was one here in Flinders somewhere. Then you'll have the highway stuff. That's Keith on the way to WA. That's a private network, the Tesla network. Interesting part is 50% of the Tesla network is now opened up to everybody. So you can actually just plug in your ordinary car. They do charge a premium for non-Tesla owners, but so be it. It's just, use it maybe 5% less the time you drive. So we're going to spend an extra $10 on your Melbourne to Brisbane back trip. NRMA has had its own network, and it's basically been now rolled into this one here, the ChargeFox network. They've bought, all the motoring authorities have bought the ChargeFox network, so the NRMA chargers are now rolling into that system. If you go out of your local area, go to PlugShare, and that will take you to wherever you happen to be for looking for the charger, so you can filter for the type of plug that you're looking for, be it just a PowerPoint that someone's made available, or a fast charge DC that's a particular network. When you get to the networks, they're like Caltex, Shell, whatever. They have their own apps that you put on the phone. I'll talk a bit more about, and there's ChargeFox, EV, those are the two new networks. Then you have Ampol and BP, and there's a couple of others as well. Annoyingly, as it happened overseas, there are all these different apps and swipe cards and whatever. In England, for instance, they've actually put in legislation, you must be interconnected. So if you have one app, it will do all of the charges. If you have one pass card, it will do all of the systems, and that's moving to happening here in Australia. One particular thing I like that's happened is EV at the moment have moved to a plug-in charge. So I enter my details into the app, recognises my car, I drive up to an EV charger now, I plug in, no app, no swipe card, nothing. It just recognises my car and just sends me the bill. Very, very simple. And that's what's happening, and ultimately that will be happening, rolling out across all the chargers and all the cars. But we are still slightly early days, and there's that sort of slight clunkiness, but you get used to it, but it is one of these slight annoyances in EV charging. Promoting EV uptake, there's quite a bit about happening with the election and what's been happening overseas as well. Basically break it down into three things. There's carrots, incentives to buy EVs. There's sticks, setting standards for the amount of pollution they can put out. And policy is just making the right settings to encourage EVs, like the fringe benefits tax exemption for EVs, and the change that was made recently for plug-in hybrids are no longer counted than they were previously. This is the sort of the big stick that's happening. They'll keep mentioning Norway. This is the year that they 100% ban, and they've hit 94% game over. It is now plug-in vehicles, and they're now moving into the next stage. They say 2040, all short-haul flights must be electric. EU says 2035. There's a bit of pushback from some of the manufacturers and things at the moment, but those numbers are pretty much right. They might fluctuate a little bit. Even some US states have said it, and even manufacturers have seen the writing on the wall. Jaguar says after this year they won't build petrol cars. Volvo have walked back from that 2026 only BEV in Australia, but they will be only BEV in Europe too by 2030. They're going to walk back that one a little bit and say, well, we'll still make them if people want to buy them, but I suspect that they will be selling a lot of them. So yeah, all the companies are starting to recognise that the writing ultimately is on the wall. What's coming? There's a few here. The Leap motor is a new Chinese manufacturer, the C10. I'll be driving one of those for a test car in about a month's time, which is a bit quicker, like 3 weeks' time, I think. There's a crazy fiberglass monocoque, space frame Renault 5 Turbo 3E will be due second half of this year. It'll spare 200 grand. That's a totally over the top electric race car. Zika 7X will be arriving second half of this year. Toyota and the BZ4X and the Solterra, there's a BZ4X out there. That's their first electric car, so even they've finally admitted that maybe things are changing. MG Cyber's that arrived late last year, that's a two-wheel convertible. Jeep Avenger that just arrived, it's surprisingly good. I had that as a test car recently, surprisingly good EV. Nissan Ariya, they've been talking about, it's been available in the things for 3 years or more now. They've been saying for 3 years it'll come here. It might arrive. I think the last I heard was it'll arrive in the Japanese financial year, which is up till March next year, maybe. And a few other choices there. The VW ID Buzz has just arrived. The Combi replacement has arrived. EV3 has just arrived. And the Insta has just hit the showrooms, I think, in the last couple of days. And yes, there are light commercial vehicles available. There's quite a number there. There's the LDV E260 actually out there. There's the e-tron 9. It's a full electric, will be available second quarter this year. The little light truck there is becoming available later this year. It's supposed to be H1, not Q1 for that. And the Rivian people would have heard about. Was supposed to be coming to Australia, but probably won't now for another couple of years. Ford E-Transit Custom, 1-ton van. E-Transit is a really good van, and the Custom should be arriving sometime soon. Ford F-150 is built as an electric car as well now. I mentioned a bit earlier about that magic $100 US per kilowatt hour. That is called the sort of price parity point that you can buy an electric car for much the same price as a petrol car. And we're getting very, very close to that number. As you will have noticed, some electric cars are breaking the $30,000 barrier now. Running an EV, I basically did this on 10,000 kilometres, compared like for like, so a petrol car versus a full electric car, and these are the numbers. The EV car on just an off-peak tariff, 20 cents a kilowatt. There's lots of cheaper off-peaks. Some people, if you're running on solar, you can work out your numbers, roughly 6 cents a kilowatt hour amortising your solar PV over its 20-year life. That'll be less than half again. $300 in electricity for 10,000 k's, Petrol car will be 1,240, using the same Australian standard for both. And I've had to use the WLTV number. Service cost, you're saving roughly $60 a year because of a 2-year service on the Kona electric and a 1-year service on the petrol. So you're saving roughly $1,000 every 10,000 kilometres. If you do 15,000 kilometres a year, you'll be saving $1,500. If you're doing 50,000, you'll be saving $5,000 a year. Something makes that total cost of ownership number for the difference even now in the price compelling. Bit of EV myth busting. I'd like to throw this one in. They said, we've got to replace all the petrol stations. Well, as I mentioned earlier, 79% of charging is done at home. The next 5% might be done in workplace, shopping centres. I keep saying 90% of petrol stations better get nervous because their business model is disappearing. Because we're used to that. That's what we become used to. Another one is they catch fire. Like we keep hearing all these headlines. The facts are, and this is coming from a large American insurance company a couple of years ago now, hybrid vehicles, roughly 3,500 new over 100,000 sold, will catch fire. Roughly 1,500 petrol ones will catch fire, and 26 electric. If you don't want a car that catches fire, don't buy a hybrid. Electric cars are much safer that way. And in Nissan, instead of 13, 14 years of selling, they've not had one car fire. They've had, due to a battery, there's been one fire recently that they're still investigating. That's out of nearly 1 million of them sold. That hybrid thing, the fuel cell electric car, that's coming. The electric cars have had, electric cars are not effective for being around since actually the first car to break 100 kilometres an hour was an electric car in 1896. Believe it or not. But this is the numbers here. Out of 100 kilowatt hours of renewable energy, you will get 69 kilowatts of energy moving your car. But you'll only get 23 kilowatt hours compressing it, so putting your refueling station right next to where the hydrolyzer for the hydrogen drain from. And if you compress it down to liquid and then move it in a tanker, 19%. We're going to end up using 3 to 4 times as much electricity to create the hydrogen and move the car the same distance, let alone setting up massive hydrogen refueling centres. It's just not going to happen. Another way is, are they more polluting driving? Well, this is the numbers straight out of the National Greenhouse Accounting Factors done to the international accounting system, and 10,000 kilometres is my round number again. The current Corolla will do roughly 1.5 tonnes of CO2e equivalent. If you drive around Tasmania, I'm mainly on hydro, less than quarter of a tonne. In South Australia, where they're 50% renewable, you'll see there was a point, so a third. Even in Victoria now, we're starting to get rid of the old brown coal generators. We're still less. That's just running on grid generated power, not paying for green energy. We're all around solar. Well, about the life of the car, it costs so much in energy terms to build a battery. That's supposedly more than the whole thing for an electric car. Well, I'm afraid to say, in Europe, 6 to 16 months, because they drive slightly less distance than, more distance than Europe. So Europe's around 2 years, Europe's 6 to 16, brain wash. US is about 6 to 16, Europe is about 2 years. And as the grid drains up, so does that carbon debt on the battery anyway. And Volvo Polestar moving to zero carbon factories, so they'll have no carbon debt as they leave the factory factory door. The EVs and electric EVs overnight, it will bring down the grid. Well, facts are, they don't add enormous amounts of power. If we went to all electric overnight, all our petrol cars changed over to electric overnight, our driveway actually have an electric car appear the next morning, about 10% overall demand. So it's not a huge amount. Many supply authorities actually stated, bring it on. You're in England, but they actually said, when they were debating 2030 or 2035, the National Grid said, the 2030 is fine, we'll cope. Obviously certain areas that will have difficulty and it's planning required, but the demand needs to be managed, you balance the load. It's not like an air conditioner where you need to turn it on when it's hot. Electric car, we see the queues that people have to save 2 cents of petrol. People will move their refueling times to suit the cheapest rate, be it petrol or be it electricity. So people will recharge overnight or during the really cheap power during the day when there's lots of solar. As I said, myth 3, the hydrogen car will create problems if you've got 10%, could be 30 to 40% instead, increased demand. As I said, discretion mode, not like an air conditioner. Oh dear, there's all these poor children and really, really polluting mines. Well, one of the problems is we do pick up stuff, and you can pick up some really bad mines around the place and blame them and say that's, this is what happened with all that type of mining. There's a recent report about lithium, and that was, as usual, picking up a really bad mine and saying they must all be like that, which is not true. This happened to be one of the really bad examples of a bad mine. We've seen plenty of those. Tailings dam collapsed in Brazil recently, a couple of years ago now. There was the rebellion in Bougainville because of the pollution that's been caused there, and they shut down the mine. It's just bad mining practices, not a particular product. Cobalt is the one that's mostly mentioned, and mostly from Congo. Many car manufacturers are starting to source it from ethical cobalt. Less than 10% of battery, and they're phasing it out. Certain batteries don't even use it. There is an electric car course for EV charging, so they don't cost heaps. If someone says, you need to upgrade all your power and it's going to cost a fortune to put in, find someone who's done this course. I'll skip through that one. There's a whole lot of information about that. Smart chargers, where you can talk to the grid and they'll actually manage to always charge at the cheapest point. I come in within about 12-18 months. But key points are putting the biggest cable size required for a 33 charger, even if you're just putting a 15 amp power point, a 10 amp power point now, because it's just the cable's cheap. Run data cables in just in case, most of them will be Wi-Fi, but throw it in anyway. And OCPP, Open Charge Point Protocol, 2.0.1 or above, will be capable of being converted to a smart charger later on. Few practicalities. Switchboard, if you've got one of those as an electrician, I cringe. To be with a new switchboard. It's not the car's fault, it's just somebody obviously recognised their switchboard. It will need replacing, but it's not the car's fault, it's just you need to upgrade. Off-street is really handy. There are options for on-street, and choosing the right tariff. They're changing different plans and things lately, and they can be quite expensive if you have a long one. There's a bit of government smart chargers that's happening. The said buy and leave from wheel charger. If you happen to be using council chargers like a lot. If you're travelling off the beaten track, one of those is quite handy, but not necessary. EV information, if you're looking for the fact sheets that are in the folders up there, then these are available. There's the summary page of all the passenger cars on the market. There's also one of what's coming, and there's one for like commercial vehicles, and after that, there is actually a page for each of my cars on the market. There's also one for second-hand that I started in April last year, so just over a year ago now. And there's also, as they finish as a new car, they roll over to a slightly different format for what to look for in a second-hand EV. Find out more, we've got Renew, a really useful source of lots of information on going off gas, etc., and saving energy. Some articles there on how to check a second-hand EV. So, and what's coming up, the Chinese are coming, the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, ASM.au, which is also where those fact sheets are available. And there's also a discussion forum, which is free to join, and lots of really good knowledge there to be found. If you want to find out some more, The Driven, I also write for, the Driven.io, the main Australian website for EV news in Australia. The Electric Vehicle Council has some really useful fact sheets. And as I mentioned, it's my own website, which has those review articles and a number of other things available there. I think that's it. Yes, I kept closely to time with fingers crossed. My email address is there if you want to send a copy for the slides. And thank you very much. I think you're running the forum next.
We will just hold questions to the end, unfortunately. We've got the forum coming up. But thank you, Bryce.